Hi, everyone, and welcome to Talk Time with the Whole Parenting. For those of you all who are here for the first time, my name is Louise, and I am a family and child development consultant, and I am also a mom. I am living the very things that we speak about here on Talk Time, and today we are talking about transgenerational transmission of parenting and its impact, but particularly its impact on the Black community in diaspora. And today, it's a subject I deal with professionally. It's a subject I deal with personally as a mother and a Black woman. And it's something I've wanted to discuss here for a long time, and it's taken until now for us to discuss it because now is the right time and we have the right people to discuss it with. And it's happening today, and I'm really happy that it is happening today. And today I have asked a few of my friends to join me to tackle this subject because it is a big subject, and I don't want to tackle it on my own. I want all the help that I can get and the tools around me to support this because I really, really, my heart is in this subject, and I want to see change. Now, I'm going to introduce each of the members of our panel individually, and then I'm going to ask them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. And so, ladies first, we're going to start with Sarah. And Sarah is a clinical social worker, and she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience with her. And so, Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Louise, for having me here. Like you said, my name is Sarah Mckechnie. I am a clinical social worker. Professionally, I work in adoptions, private adoptions, but also spend about 11 to 13 years in public child welfare. So, this concept of parenting and educating and training, the common person on, how we want to yield positive outcomes for children is something that I do professionally, but also personally. I'm a mom of three. I have a 7-year old, a 10-year old, and a 14-year-old. So believe it or not, everything that I will be talking about here today, I am not a perfectionist at it. I am not an expert. I am learning and growing. Just like we would want to emulate and do with everyone that's going to be watching here today. So I'm one of
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you, Sarah. And next we have Gail. And Gail brings with her a wealth of knowledge as well on psychology. And she is a school counselor. Gail, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for the invitation, Louise, and to also share with my friends, Sarah and Lario. Well, as Louise said, I am a school counselor. I've been a school counselor for about 13 years. And so every day I interact with teenagers. And in interacting with them and listening to their problems and helping them to find solutions to their problems, we talk about parenting because they live with their parents. And so their primary caregivers are very important to, problem solving and with their development. And so just observing the different parenting styles and how that influences the development of the children and their ability to successfully get through their adolescence, then I learn a lot. I've observed a lot. And even me as a parent, I also have 3 children. I have a teenager, 16, an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old as well. And so in my capacity as a parent, I still have to learn, although there's a lot of head knowledge,
Mhm.
the practicality of applying the head knowledge can be a challenge as well. So none of us is here as a perfect parent, but we are learning, and the education helps us every day to be a better parent. So I hope today that our interaction and sharing with everyone will just help us to have better connection with our children.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. And our next guest is Lario. And Lario and I will pause here because Lario is our first male guest on Talk Time, and I'm really happy to have him on. And Lario brings so much to the table today. I will tell you something. When I was writing his credentials down for the 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 flyer, he actually asked me to take some of it out. So that's how much he's bringing. So as much as you see so much behind his name, I haven't put everything down there. But Lario is, for today's purposes, an approved mental health professional and also a social worker. And Lario, can you tell me a bit more, tell us, sorry, a bit more about yourself?
Okay. Thanks, Louise. Thanks for the very warm introduction and invitation as well. I want to echo the rest of the panel. Um, yeah, as you said, I'm Lario. I'm a social worker. Um, in the practicing in the UK. But my social work takes me right across the lifespan. So I work in a sort of generic role. So I work with children, families, and I work with adults, and I work with young people. But I'm also an approved mental health professional, which in the UK that translates to somebody who specifically, asks questions of people who are mentally disordered and determines really whether or not they need emergency psychiatric, assessments in hospitals or elsewhere.
Mhm.
So I'm also so I think what I bring is an understanding as we talk about sort of transgenerational sort of parenting. What I bring is an understanding of us as human beings, how we live, we live out this reality right across the piece, working with young people, with children, with adults, and older adults.
Mhm.
But also that interesting nexus between, trauma and people's mental health.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things I hopefully I'd want to develop on today. I'm also a parent of two children. I've got a 16-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. And again, like the rest of the panel, this is not. I do have some, formal, credentials in terms of looking at these things. But today, to be honest, I'm here in my capacity more so as a parent who recognizes that there are certain things that, in particular in the Black community, which is really I'm assuming is our audience today,
Yeah.
there are things that we have learned and picked up along the way that is no longer serving us. And
Yeah.
I want to really start off or lend some credence to the sort of conversation really about how can we look at things differently and how we could work as parents to ensure that our children live their fullest lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lario. So the discussion today will be an honest and informative one. It's intended to educate and to get us to think. It's not intended to cast blame or to brand anyone as a bad parent, and I want to make that fundamentally clear. We are all on this journey. I am on this journey. I have been in this profession for so long, most of my adult life, and I am still learning. I am still trying, and things that I know on an intellectual level, sometimes my brain and my actions fail me. But it's about us thinking and understanding that we need to pause and be more conscious about what we do as parents. I hope by the end of this discussion we can pause and do some introspection individually about parenting practices and what exactly is influencing it, and with the hope that we can move forward and make positive change. Now, what let's go right into it. What is transgenerational transmission of parenting? So transgenerational transmission of parenting or intergenerational transmission of parenting, as it's also called, is the process through which intentionally or unintentionally an earlier generation psychologically influences the parenting attitudes and behaviors of the next generation. And we know when we look at research, it shows that there are key aspects of parenting in mothers and fathers that are influenced by their own, our own parenting experiences when we were growing up. And this also includes the type of attachment that we have with our parents. Now, I find this quite powerful because I think it what my great great grandmother did, even though she's dead and I have never met her, has impacted how I was parented and how I parent my children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question is, how does this happen? Lario, I'm going to throw that question out to you. How does this actually happen? It seems supernatural to some sort. Tell us how this happens to us.
Well, in terms of, yes, our parents are our first teachers, and they teach us everything, and you reference attachment theory, this idea that we, as we develop, as we grow as young children, we form attachment to a particular caregiver, and we
Yeah.
look to that person for all of our sort of psychological needs. um, I think we're unique as humans in the sense that, if we look around sort of mammals, most mammals have a very short childhood, whereas human beings, we have a quite a protracted childhood. We remain children for a very long time. And we are born very, very helpless. If you think about, think for example of a calf. I mean, a calf is born in the field, and the next day it's sucking its mother and having milk and is running around a couple of weeks or even same day. As human
Yeah.
beings, we have a very, very extended period of childhood, and in that period, we're quite vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And we remain vulnerable for quite a long time, actually.
Yeah.
And so the when we everything that we need to know, there are very few things in human beings that you know our survival depends on, that is instinctive. A lot of the things that we need to know has to be taught.
Yeah.
And when we think in terms of children, of course, when we think in terms of how do we learn, I think in terms of I always give an example of, I've had families who, over the years, and we've had in cases where, children have come and we've seen, in terms of their dental health has been particularly poor, because they've got all sorts of cavities and all sorts of gum infections and all sorts of stuff. And in some cases, we've had to actually get the dentist to remove a full set of teeth from children who are 3 and 2 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, but didn't this mother understand that it's important to brush this child's teeth, or to teach this child that it's important to do so? And you think, well, how did you learn to do that, Lario? Well, you learned to do that because, of course, your parent taught you to do that. But have you ever considered, if you were in a situation where brushing your teeth wasn't a priority, when
Mm-hmm.
you have a child,
Yeah.
you're not going to make that a priority. So it's okay to say, for example, as somebody who's been socialized into the necessity of brushing teeth, that this is
Yeah.
important, but also to think of, well, if it wasn't, and you could think of so many different examples. Now, that's a negative example, but you could think of some positive examples. For example, so one of the things that we always say is very important in childhood, expressing warmth, being non-critical. If you grew up in a family that wasn't particularly a mom who was not particularly critical, who was warm, supportive, who was there, you know, it, if that's how she was parented, it's very likely to be the way that she will parent you. And in turn, when you, as a parent, you become a parent, you're going to pass this on. So transgenerational parenting sounds, quite sophisticated, but It's not really. It's just that children actually, in lots of cases, become what they see.
Mhm.
Now, I think I'm sure we're going to get onto that, further later down the line. But I think in the Black community, and I want to begin to start to think in the Black community, the African, Caribbean, Black American community, we a lot of our parenting was based, or sort of, it's kind of stemmed from a sort of deficit model.
Hmm.
Um, it may sometimes it sounds far fetched, but I think we have to think in terms of particularly those of us who, are sort of the grandchildren of slaves. We have to recognize that the model of discipline, the model of child rearing that that informs the way that, that we adopted, a lot of it came from the plantation.
Mhm.
The legacies of slavery, unfortunately, in lots of ways, has continued to be quite prominent in the way that we make sense of our world.
Yeah.
And uh, I mean, as you know, I'm from the Caribbean, and I grew up in the West Indies, and there are lots of practices, child rearing practices. Some of the more violent aspects of that you could really trace right back to the days of the plantation. And so when we talk about, changing that cycle, we're not, we are recognizing, of course, that we've had this significant collective trauma, that we have to work very hard to circumvent. So
Yeah.
yes, when we think in terms of transgenerational parenting, it's really on a very basic level. It's the idea that yes, your parents will parent or is very likely to parent you. And we're not saying here that people do have agency, and sometimes people make some radical changes without any intervention. Some people
Yeah.
sometimes come to the realization and they say, oh, you know what, this is how I was parented. I didn't think that was very helpful. I am not to, so it's not a sort of default position to say, well,
Yeah.
I was parented that way, but it's also important to, it's very likely. And then, of course, as I'm sure as we'll start to talk about later, then of course there are very emotive aspects because parenting has there's a lot about identity sort of wrapped up into this. This is who I am,
Mhm.
and I'm sure later on we begin to see relationships to people's worldview and their faith positions often sometimes inform some of these things in terms of where do I get, what is my understanding of a child? Who is a child? What is a child? Does a child have
Yeah.
agency? Is a child is a child somebody with their own mind?
Mhm.
Is a child this empty vessel I need to pour things into? So I think all these things have, implications in how we come around parenting. But definitely, there is certainly, I mean, as you quite rightly, highlighted, Louise, the research, the academic literature is very clear that,
Yeah.
we tend to parent, our parenting is transmitted, it's definitely transmitted from one generation to the next. And it continues and continues. And if there is something positive, that's beautiful. But if there
Yeah.
are negative elements being transmitted, then understandably, that generational impact, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I'll shut up now. And
Thank you, Larry. And of course, I know that there are more aspects that you wanted to add to it, but for the purpose of today, um, thank you so much for that explanation because it takes us further into the the um the discussion and to this question. Now, Sarah, Lario answered this, cleared up a lot for us in terms of how transgenerational transmission of parenting happens. So we see how parenting styles, good, as Laria mentioned, and bad, can last through generations. Why is it important that we pay attention to the quality of our parenting?
Yeah, so honestly, there's so much that I can piggyback on from Lario, from in terms of the vulnerability of the child, the things that we learn innately from our parents, the way that we're socialized, things that we don't even know are being transmitted that we now are going to emulate for our children and model for our children. One of the things that's important to note as parents that I usually reflect back to myself in every situation in terms of the impact is with each scenario, you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the end result that I want from this interaction
Yeah.
with my child, right?
Yeah.
In terms of gentle parenting, what we usually hear is that it is very intentional and it's something that takes much longer, right? If you just snap at a child, if you just decide, okay, I'm gonna, crack the whip. What do we say? Spare the rod, spoil the child. You know, if we say that we're gonna take that approach, can it get results much more quickly in the moment? Yes, but it's usually a fear-based response that we are uh, seemingly getting from our kids, as opposed to putting in the time and the intention of let me step back for a moment. Let me talk through and see, why is my child acting out in this way? Where is this mood coming from? And taking the time, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's an hour that you have to sit there, and doing that is going to give you a different outcome in each scenario. The one that comes from gentle parenting is going to give you a much longer lasting result in terms of you've not only transformed the behavior for today, but
Yeah.
you've transformed it hopefully for tomorrow and next week and next month. And so when you think about the impacts for children who are growing up where the parenting style was more aggressive and more punitive and more, authoritarian, you have children who grow up with more maladaptive behaviors, who can't really function in their interpersonal relationships. They might be reclusive. Okay, they might not be able to know how to express themselves vocally. You have different things from mental health to physical health to their success in academia. A lot of these things are directly tied and have a direct impact from how they're parented in those informative years. As Lario said, the length of time that your child is significant, and what you're ingesting during those periods where you have that, you're formulating your personality from 0 to 7. You're formulating who you are, and you're developing your identity in terms of what is poured into you. You're gonna have the results, positive or negative. What
Yeah.
we put in is what we're gonna get out. And so it's something that I like to reflect on in the moment. And that's actually what allows me to, slow down,
Yeah.
take a beat, figure out, okay, do I want to, just pounce on this situation and, demand respect, right? As one of the things that I heard from what Laria said as well is that slave mentality where
Yeah.
we use the whip to be able to get the results that we want immediately. Well, children are not slaves.
Yeah.
They're literally they're little people, they're little humans. And so things that we haven't developed yet for ourselves as adults, okay? Children are still figuring out how to express themselves, how to
Mhm.
manage frustration, how to manage conflict, how to respond in the face of fear. And so all of that we are developing and molding for children to be able to create functional, members of society as their adults who can then be successful and then who can then go on to parent their children if they should have children in
Yeah.
a way that right in a lot of the things we're having to break, a lot of the things we didn't get as kids, and now we're having to break the mold. And so there's also internal conflict as well for many of us who grew up with one model and are trying to now reformat that
Yeah.
to be able to yield different results in our own kids.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. And to move on from that, now we know as professionals, when you see, we know that research shows that in the Black community, parents are a lot less likely to adopt a gentler approach to parenting. Research also has shown that a greater percentage of Black mothers, and I haven't seen any research about Black fathers, but a greater percentage of Black mothers beat their children than other ethnicities. This is not because we love our children any less than people from other ethnicities, um, we believe that what we're doing is right. Now, a recent photo of Beyonce, and I'll just say a few things and then ask the question on that. A recent photo of Beyonce holding her last daughter, her youngest daughter, on her hip, was met with a comment on social media that says, "We are the black aunties," to tell her to put that baby down. And when you read further down in the comment section, you recognize that people actually believe that lifting a baby up, child, not a baby, but a child who can walk, lifting a child up who can walk will spoil that child. And I I actually remember, and this has stuck with me because from the time I was really young, I remember people always saying, "Oh, don't kiss up that baby so much, you will spoil that child." Don't hug up that child so much, you'll spoil that child. I remember uh, growing up, and even now I see it, that a child will come to their parent or their caregiver, whoever the caregiver is, and a lovely auntie will say, "Leave your mommy alone, go and play." And it seems like this, we seem almost afraid to be gentler and more affectionate to our children. And this is not to say that we are not affectionate or gentle at all. I just think it appears that we have a reservation towards it. We guard fiercely, and I say this fiercely, we guard fiercely the right to whoop our children, to beat our children. If you look on social media, and I get headaches sometimes just looking at parenting comments on social media, people rationalize punishing their children physically and emotionally and claim that it's the best way. People believe that it's the best way to parent, and we wear having been beaten and being parented harshly like a badge of honor. We laugh about it a lot, and you see it. It makes good forwards on social media, and we laugh at people who choose to parent more gently. We ridicule them online, and to their faces. We make statements like, "You will see what will happen to that child." Um, People who choose to parent more gently often feel a need to defend their position. And I'm saying a lot, but I'm coming to a point. They feel the need to defend their position as to why they feel they need to be more gentle in their parenting with their children. A recent Instagram post on mindful parenting by a Black influencer was met with several negative comments, claiming that she was sold out. And one of the comments even stated, "You may not hit them at home, but you better be prepared for someone to hit them outside of your home." And we hear comments like, "Give that child to me for a week and you'll see what I will do with them." You know, um, I find it upsetting. But we also know from research that there is no evidence, and this is research based. There is no evidence of physical punishment of children in West African culture.
Wow.
And if we recognize, and that's history before slavery, we recognize that the practice started after after slavery began. Um, and even though research shows that this is not a historically African, Black African practice, um, and we see that many Europeans are dropping, or people of European descent are dropping the practice of being harsh as parents and holding on to physical punishments and all of that. People from the Black community seem to be embracing it still. And I don't want to paint a broad brush because use a brush to paint broadly, because there are people who are thinking differently. But I'm talking research based, we see that still there are so many people in the Black community across the diaspora who are holding on really tightly to being parenting in a harsher way, particularly when it comes to physical punishment. Now, why do you believe that as a community, and Larry, you touched on some of it, why do we, and I want all of you to give a little bit of an input in there. Why do we believe that as a community, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary, we feel so afraid to parent more gently, and we hold on so strongly to physical punishment and parenting in a harsher way? Why do you think we are so afraid of being affectionate? Why do we seem to hold on to this like it's an heirloom? And if we let go of it, we will lose a part of who we are, because that it seems that way very often. Why do you think that is? Anybody? Shoot.
Well, I'll go first.
Okay.
Well, just like Lario mentioned about slavery, I just believe that the authoritarian parenting style is just, the trauma response from slavery that has been transmitted through the generations to us. And if we do not pay attention to it and move from an area of operating from the survival mode into more consciousness in our parenting, then it's going to perpetuate.
Yeah.
And so also um, the fear of being judged by
Yeah.
others in the community also has to be addressed. You're an adult. Your children are your responsibility. So the people that you are responsible to or for are your children, and not necessarily people in your community and what they think and the judgment. So
Yeah.
we need to divorce ourselves, be confident enough in your skills that you are trying to develop, the outcomes that you want from your parenting methods with your children, and let that be the judge of how you parent your children, and not necessarily what my neighbor is going to say or what my auntie is going to say. And that will come because we grow up in a community where everybody wants to contribute to parenting your child, and
Yeah.
and they come with their ideas of how things should go. And then we have our religious beliefs that people use as well, and they try to tell
Yeah.
you, okay, this is how you should parent your child, when you know for sure this is not serving my family, this is not serving my child. I have seen how these sort of parenting methods negatively impacts children all the way into their adulthood, and how it perpetuates to their children as well. So
Yeah.
if we need to move on from the dysfunction
Mhm.
and the dysfunctional relationships that perpetuate out of negative parenting, then we have to be brave enough to do what we know is best for our children.
Yeah.
That the gentle parenting is the best way. Can you imagine? I always think of our pets,
Mhm.
and in many households, the pets get the gentle parenting. you know?
Mm,
And then if somebody kicks the cat or the dog, everybody's up in arms. Why would you do that? That's
Yeah.
wicked. But you slap up the children,
Yeah.
mm,
the cat gets patted, and it loves it when it comes, and it comes on your lap. Don't you want your child to come to you for affection and for love and enjoy
mm,
that connection and experience?
mm.
Yeah.
So the display of affection is not for pets. It is good for pets, but the priority should be the connection for your children and with your children.
I think you just set somebody free, Gail. That comparison with the pets, I actually never considered that. So we do have the ability,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
how to do it, but for some reason, when it comes to children, it's the illusion of control. We feel like we have control when we are able to. Why do we want to inflict pain to teach a lesson?
I know.
Physical
I know.
pain to teach a
Same.
lesson. That really is a slave master mentality. Um, and it really is indicative of the lack of skill on our part than it has than anything to do with the child. It's the lack of skill on our part, and we have to practice the self-control. We have to regulate. If the child is escalated, we can be up here with them,
That's
right?
right.
We have to, regulate our emotions and have them model us and have them, follow us. And it has nothing to do with, with beating the child. It is barbaric. And I remember having a very heated post on Facebook. Louise talked about the social media dialogue. I have had a very heated conversation on Facebook with regard to um, corporal punishment.
Yeah.
And, my West Indians were coming for me. They were coming for me. But it's true. We hold it as a badge of honor. And and a family heirloom, and no one is wanting to figure out, is there another way to do this? And as you said, there is research to show that yes, there are a multitude of other tools in your parenting basket that you can pull from to be able to, to garner these results. We do not have to inflict physical pain on a child for
Children.
them to learn.
Yeah, I
Laria, do
mean,
you want to
I
add to
couldn't.
this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's right that we're making the connection between our sort of collective trauma as people from African descent living in this part of the world, that being slavery. And I'm not going to be apologetic about making those links at all.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not to say, of course, that one is absolving himself of or herself of agency. We do have agency, so we're not here saying, "Oh, well, slavery happened, and so we have no choice." What we are saying, we're trying to find an explanation, an explanatory sort of model for why do we do this? Because as Gail rightly said, we have the capacity to love.
Yeah.
We're not going to be saying to ourselves we don't have the capacity to love and to be gentle. So we can. And oftentimes, I think, of course, I don't think that parents who whoop their child or beat their children are. These are parents who love their children, but these are
Yeah.
parents who, unfortunately, have been told, or again because of the transgenerational issue, that this is how this is how you enforce boundaries. This is the only means. And this idea, I mean, I was thinking as you were speaking, Louise, about this idea of spoiling the children. And yes, that's quite a dominant narrative, actually,
Yeah.
in my community, the Caribbean community, which I know best. This idea that, well, it's almost as if, you know, you've got to be particularly harsh so as to prevent the child from becoming rotten fruit. Now,
Hmm.
that's problematic
Yeah.
on many levels. And like most problematic things, there is, yes, of course, we do know. So we are not here, I don't think any of us here is saying that we have to establish boundaries. Parenting, just as I said earlier, that, uh, 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 mammals, among mammals, we've got this very extended childhood. We've got to teach our children almost everything. You know, it's a challenge, but what we're saying, we can introduce boundaries. There's no, we're not. I'm not, and I don't think any of us are advocating a boundary-less or boundary-free
Yeah.
parenting. Yes, of course, we've got to say to children, no. We've got to say stop. We've got to say go on. We've got to say, we have to introduce boundaries.
Yeah.
But what we're saying, we don't have to physically assault our children in order, as Sarah said earlier, for these
Yeah.
boundaries to be introduced, but for them to be sustainable. Because what we want is we want sustainability.
Yeah.
We don't want, and it's, we don't want quick fixes.
No.
I often think of this. I was reflecting earlier on a very typical example. Let's say you've got a mother, she's walking down the road, and she's got young Tommy in her hand, and there's traffic, oncoming traffic, and toddlers, as they do, he lets go of her hands and he runs, and he's almost hit by a car. And mother slaps him quite heavily, yeah, and grabs him and slaps him. And you think, well, what are the psychological processes going on here? But
Hmm.
if you step back and you look behind the scene, what is the emotion that mother is responding to? Why did mom behave that way or
Yeah.
dad? They were reacting out of fear.
Yeah.
But there are so many things about our society and the way we socialized, which tells us it is not okay to say to our children that we're scared. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I would want to propose a different way of dealing with that very same scenario. I would want to say, okay, mother rightly used protective force to grab, young Tommy away from the cars. But when he does come from the cars, he says, she says to him, when you do this, it makes mommy very scared.
Yeah.
I was very scared this was going to happen to you. And I don't want you to do this again because you can get hurt. But of course,
Yeah.
unfortunately, talking about the legacies, we don't all have that the language,
Yeah.
and the emotional competence to really name our emotions, to see how they affect us, to treat
Mm-hmm.
our children as little human beings, and to respond in that way. So I think a solution is going to have to come from us recognizing some of these daily.
Yes.
This would
And
be my point.
I want, sorry, and I want to pause here just to piggyback on what Lario said. We are not in any way here saying that parenting should be free of discipline. In fact, if you're not disciplining your children, you're not parenting right.
Mm-hmm.
But what we need to understand is what discipline is. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is not physically inflicting pain on your child. Discipline is teaching. And this
Yes.
goes back to what Larry said and what Sarah said. You want it to be sustainable. Um, if I am getting my child to behave out of fear, my child will behave out of fear when they know they're going to be punished.
Mm-hmm.
Take that out of the equation when they know I will never find out, and you will see a change in behavior. What you want is for your child to understand why they need to behave this way and continue to behave this way because it's the better thing to do. And even when you are not in the equation, because your child understands that this is the right thing to do, because if you've taught that child and that child has developed that sense of morality or ethics or an understanding of what is right and wrong, then they do it regardless of whether they know somebody else is going to find out or not.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to do the right thing because they have been taught rather than forced into a behavior because of fear. And that is what we want. We want them to be consistent with their behavior because they know this is what I need to do. Um, Also, just to touch on that, I kind of wanted to mention, and this is very broad, and we could go into it a little bit more. Actually, I'm gonna leave that here, and I'm going to go on to the next question about exhibitionist type punishment. So if you do a search on YouTube, you will find about 30,000, and this is crazy, about 30,000 matches for child shaming videos, right? Black parents are notorious for filming their children,
Oh my goodness.
um, particularly beating them and putting it on social media. And we see the exhibitionist type of, you know, behavior with like Toya Graham, who everybody praised because she cussed off that child in front of his school. Um, Not everybody, but a lot of people praise, which I felt was quite disturbing. We see this, and there seems to be a need to punish Ashley, but not just to punish Ashley, to let everybody else know that I don't play,
Mm-hmm.
right? I punish Ashley. This is who I am. In my house, my children fear me. What are your thoughts on this? And why do you think we need to let others know that we are not, I don't mess. My children can't mess with me.
I think Gail touched on it in one of her early responses, and also a couple people in the comments have also touched on it. It's
Yeah.
this communal pressure
Yeah.
to show that, I am the boss in my house. My children, like you said, my children fear me. I'm not to be messed with, and it really is that. Um, that internal conflict that we have to make sure that we're setting up our kids so that no one else can be the arbiter, or not that, but no one else is going to inflict the violence. I will do it
Yeah.
first. I will beat you to the punch. And so, as we've been saying throughout this, it comes from a good place, but it's
Mhm.
also it's a trauma response,
Yeah.
to feel that we have to, we're parenting for our household and for everyone around us without taking into consideration the mental impact on the child for that type of shaming.
Mhm.
The results of racism on that everyone holds the black child to a much higher standard
Yeah.
than any other ethnic group.
Yeah.
Um, we have a lot that we are preparing our children for in society, a
Yeah.
lot more heavier conversations that we're having with our kids from a much earlier age. I mean,
Mhm.
our kids are essentially adults before they make it out of diapers.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's all of that societal pressure. And then so to put it on social media now is to say, I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
I'm doing my part in my community, and my child's not going to play, and my child's not going to be caught up in the system, and all of that. But it's maladaptive, and it's misguided and ill-informed. And I really, really wish, I personally don't watch those videos. I can't. They're
No,
upsetting.
no, no.
Um,
Mhm.
so, but I see them, right?
Yeah.
I see it in the captions, and it's disheartening.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
really, I re- sorry, I really think that people from really Caribbean parentage standpoint really believe that punitive methods are actually good for children. Some people really believe, and you will hear people say, "Oh, but my parents beat me when I was growing up, and I didn't die." I
Yeah.
cannot stand to hear that.
As if that's the standard.
Oh my goodness, that's the standard. I didn't die. I turned out fine. Really? Are you fine? Can you even regulate your emotions?
Yeah.
And there are worse things than dying, you know? And
Exactly.
you probably are literally dying because the scientific evidence shows that the physical effects of punitive or of corporal punishment are, long lasting into your adulthood. And so what can happen? Your immune system becomes compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are more at risk of developing cancers
Yes.
and other issues within your body, mental health illnesses, and all sorts of illnesses. So you are progressively dying. Probably
Yeah.
you didn't. And there are children who die.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
A
and
high mortality rate from
yeah,
physical abuse.
from physical abuse, from their parenting. So we need to shift from that mindset that I didn't die and look at how has this affected me? How is this influencing my parenting style with my children? You
Yeah.
know, how is that affecting my relationship with my children? After I've beat my child, how is my child relating to me? What's the communication like?
Yeah.
Can I now go and be affectionate with my child?
Yeah.
How is that affecting the child's self-esteem, their self-worth?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times we look for the physical symptoms and
Yeah.
we tend to overlook or not acknowledge that there's a lot of psychological stuff going on there that is going to manifest itself, probably not today, but tomorrow, or in their future relationships with their significant others or interacting with people in society and even their own children. So we have to shift our mindset from and also I wanted to say that so discipline and parenting is not about a response or reaction
Yeah.
to an
Yeah.
event.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, it's supposed to be something that is consistent.
Yeah.
So if we think about discipline and parenting as something that is positive,
Mhm.
then we know that every day From the time we wake up in the morning, I am parenting, I'm disciplining, I'm teaching, my child is learning. I am learning from my child as well. So this child is not my property that I
No.
have to fix, or a problem that I have to fix, but my interactions with this child every day, as I'm cooking, as we're discussing, as different things are happening, we're just talking about school, we're talking about relationships, all of that is parenting and disciplining, so that when an event occurs or when a child displays a behavior that needs modification, and you have to include consequences, which is part of discipline, but it's not,
Yeah.
the consequences does not encompass the entire, scope of discipline. And we have to start looking at discipline and parenting as something that is positive, that we do every day, and not an event that occurs when the child displays a behavior that we do not desire.
And that takes us nicely into our next question about impact. But I want to just talk about something that Gail just said about consequences as opposed to punishment. In our world, in real life, if I do something, there's a consequence to it,
Mhm.
whether it's good or whether it's bad. And our children need to know that. There are consequences to your action. If I do something good, there's a consequence. I may not see it, but it is happening. It may affect somebody else. If I do something bad, there's a consequence to my behavior as well. Children need to know that. And this is what we need to practice for our children in our homes, that there are consequences to actions. But we need to discuss those things. We need to speak to our children about these things beforehand. So I
Right.
know this behavior will result in this consequence, right? If I don't do my homework, XYZ, I'm not going to be punished. It needs to be something that's like for like. You don't smash a child face in because they got an F. You know, it doesn't make any sense, right? But Gail, you were talking about impact already, and I just want each of us to touch a little bit on the real impact of harsh parenting and of physical punishment. Because, like Gail said, we hear all the time, oh, well, I got parented this way, and look at me today. And people seem to truly believe that the emotionally harsh and physically painful way that they were raised transform them in a positive way, and is solely or primarily responsible for any type of success that they have today. Um, and yes, you may have a good job, or a lot of things may seem to be lining up for you. But what are some of the consequences of that type of parenting? What's the real impact, Bill?
Yeah, yeah, so as I mentioned before, there's psychological impact.
Yeah,
So children learn how to distrust their parents
yeah,
when they are treated harshly. Because if I come to my parent with the truth about something that I did or said, and the response is going to be a beating or some sort of harsh treatment or harsh words, then I'm not going to share. So then children learn how not to be vulnerable
yeah,
with their parents, and then that translates into them not being able to connect in their own relationships when they become adults. They're not going to be vulnerable. They're not going to be trusting, because this is what they've learned, that people can't handle the truth.
yeah,
So I can't be naked, quote unquote. I
yeah.
have to put on a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we see that there's an increase in mental health problems like anxiety and depression and all of that, in response to the trauma that comes from corporal
Very high in the
punishment.
Black community.
Yeah. And then I mentioned the physical, the somatic problems that can occur,
Yeah,
cancer and all these different problems. Then there's societal problems as well. So you see an increase in truancy,
yeah,
in the use of alcohol and drugs, an increase in domestic violence.
Yeah.
It's just a whole lot of problems on our hands. So it's not only affecting the family, it affects the individual, it affects the interaction with people in the community, and it affects the culture. It just ripples down into every aspect of life. And so a lot of times children who experience continued, you know abuse. Let's
Yeah.
call it by
Let's
its
call it by
name.
its name. Yeah.
Physical abuse and verbal abuse as well, and neglect. Children who experience those sorts of abuses, they grow up to be dysfunctional. They have dysfunctional relationships,
Yeah.
and it's just a mess.
Yeah.
And so we have to, take a step back and really consider, is punishment working for us?
Yeah.
And let us not look at the other races and judge them, but see what we can learn from them.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we may be different races, but we are all human.
Yeah.
And we as human beings have the same sorts of needs. And
Mhm.
we are very good in our community to provide physiological needs for our children. We have that down
Yeah.
pat, the
Feed them.
food, the shelter, and the clothing, and all of that.
Yeah.
We're good at that.
We're
Our
very
girls, I mean, that part is straight, their
yes.
hair, and the hair is well done, and we feel proud. But what is
Yeah.
going on with that child inside? You know, who is this person becoming?
Yeah.
Because yes, she looks pretty, but you just insulted her.
Exactly.
Yeah, you just gave her a slap in her face,
Yeah.
and so she looks pretty on the outside, but there's nothing beautiful going on inside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
and this is what
How much
is,
turmoil.
is going to stick with her long term. And
Yeah.
so she may not even believe that she's pretty by the time she gets to a
Yeah.
teenager, because you have eroded her self-esteem and her self-worth.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to share that. And Larry, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a one-trick pony, but I'm gonna go back to the legacies of slavery again,
Yes.
particularly when we talk
That's what
about
you do. Yeah.
the public shaming.
Mm-hmm.
Let's remember, lynching was a public event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lynchings didn't happen in private. I mean, guys literally, I mean, it would be, this is what is going on this Sunday. There's going to be a lynching.
Yeah.
Tickets were sold, cards were set. There was a big celebration.
Hmm.
We have picked up over the years this idea that shaming our kids publicly, it has its origin. It has its
Mhm.
origin in that collective trauma. And so
Mhm.
we've carried it on, isn't it? And we want to. Obviously, you know, and it's often, and I'm not going to let men off the hook here.
Mhm.
Oftentimes you've got a single parent because dad
Mhm.
has, has probably has other
Absconded.
agendas, absconded, and she's bringing up these kids, and she's really frustrated. She's
Yeah.
frustrated because she's got no money, she's got no, housing is precarious, psychologically, she herself was parented in a way that is violent,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mhm.
she has these kids, but all she wants the best for them. She wants them to
Yeah.
be good human
Yeah.
beings. You know, she doesn't want them to go to prison because
No.
she's looked around and she's seen how the neighbors' kids have ended up in prison. So she's
Mhm.
really fearful, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But she doesn't have the language to say to young Tommy, I am scared because when you behave like this,
Yeah.
it's likely some of the consequences of this is that you might get in trouble with the police. And I
Yeah.
want you to behave differently because I don't want you to go to prison.
Yeah.
But it's never communicated from that point of view, you see. It's always
Mhm.
communicated from the point of view, you are a bad person, and so I am going to stamp out your badness by either a box or a cake or a saucepan or
Yeah.
whatever is available. Now, again, we're not here shaming parents. I just never my intention,
No. Yeah.
because as I say, it's about transgenerational, but it's about having this realization that there are lots of things we learned that are quite maladaptive. We
Yeah.
cannot, we all should want a less violent society. And,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
and I think the way to get that, and yes, we know sociological evidence around the connection between poverty and all these different things. So yes, that is a factor. Poor parents, unfortunately, are more likely to use more authoritative, more forms of punishment. Parents where not exclusively, but if there are two parents who are loving and kind, that these situations are always almost better for kids. That's the reality. However, we often we need to recognize that our kids are, they are little human beings
Yeah.
who, irrespective of who, obviously equally wants to do right by themselves. I don't, I think part of the way your parenting stands is, again, your view of human nature. I think it's something that sometimes, I mean, we probably don't have the time here to discuss it in length, but I think part of the legacies of slavery is what you were told about yourself. You were told that you are degenerate in some regards, so we would beat that nonsense out of you. And
Mm,
sadly, I think we're still beating nonsense out of our children
yeah.
because we've internalized some of these negative cognitions about ourselves, about who
Mhm.
we are. And we are beautiful beings with the capacity to love and to
Mhm.
do fantastic things. And most of us want to do the right ethical thing. And I think it's about, if we adjust our parenting stance to see our children as these I mean, I've got two kids, and and this is not, of course, here, sort of full disclosure, but I've never really felt tempted, although I was parented a different way. I never
Mhm.
felt tempted. And there were points in my time when I actually thought, oh my gosh, I've never really hit my kids, but they're all right. And the moment you, I wouldn't say they're perfect, but of course you recognize. So I'm not here speaking from the point of view of, I think that it is very possible
Yes.
to raise well adjusted, loving, kind,
Yeah.
ambitious, educated children outside the scope of violence,
Agreed.
outside the force. Yeah. So yes, this would be my view on this. I think, again, some of the legacy. I mean, we have to. I mean, slavery was a nasty thing, and
Yeah.
the legacies of that collective trauma. I mean, we're beginning to now know about this epigenetics, the way that the environment. We recognize now that the environment is and behaviors has the capacity to affect the way our genes are expressed.
Yeah.
you know so this generational issue, these are things that, these are quite significant. It's not
It's
just on a
pervasive.
behavioral level, it's also on a genetic level, the way things are being expressed. So we owe it to our kids and to our generations to really stop and pause and think
Yeah.
and have that conversation about, boy, let's try to do things differently.
And and I have so many more questions to ask, but we're running out of time. And I don't want this to be too long. I feel we need a part two of this, to be honest, to discuss the other parts that we want. I have down here. But I want to stress something that Lario said. I if I if there's nothing else that I do in my professional life, I want people to understand that you can successfully parent a child gently
Hmm.
without raising your hand, without shouting. You can actually have a child who obeys and doesn't, obviously, and we need to figure out what obedience is as well.
Well,
So
yes,
if
I
I'm
was
telling
about to
you,
say yes.
my son says to me, Mommy, I don't agree with you. Mommy, I don't like this. I don't think that is misbehavior. I don't class that as misbehavior. I class that as communication. I need that from him. I want that from him. But willful disobedience is a very different thing,
Mhm.
right? Y- Sneaking all the time behind your back to do stuff, it's quite possible to have a child who is obedient and kind and well adjusted and not dysfunctional by being mindful, parenting consciously, and treating that child in a gentle manner. And I know some people don't understand how to do it. And this is why we're here. This is why Gail is here. This is why Sarah is here. This is why Lario is here. This is why I'm here. This is why I started the whole parenting in the first place, so that we can understand how to do this. Um, and I don't want people to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to mention another impact, an impact that we I don't want us to miss. Childhood suicide is a public health concern in the Black community. And we need to let that sink in. I'm going to leave it there because we can go a long time discussing it. Childhood suicide and mental illness among children is a public health concern.
Louis, if I may add, can I want to say some quick things about that?
Go
Because,
ahead, Laura.
yeah, because I think it is, yes, when people say, oh, I beat my child, and I turned out okay. And the question always is, no, you haven't, because I'm probably privileged or not privileged enough to go intrapsychically and to really see people on a one-to-one to see the impact, the people who say, I turned out okay, but then in therapy you see them bawling their eyes out, you see the incidents of eating disorders, you see the incidents of severe mental illness and suicide. And yes, suicide is becoming quite rampant, actually. And I think it's important, as parents, that we talk to our children about suicide. We act, because there is some myths, and I always jump at the opportunity to demystify as much as I can suicide, because I think there is some people say, well, if you talk about suicide, it's likely that the child will commit suicide. No, in fact, most people who are suicidal, and suicidal is an all human beings, and sadly have had reasons to kill themselves for a very long time, and sometimes people do successfully. But most people who are very feel quite supported when somebody mentions it. There's no evidence that mentioning suicide is going to in any way impact, cause a child to commit suicide. Children do sadly do it, and as parents, we have to develop a vocabulary. I mean, parenting is tough. I don't want to sit here and pretend for a moment that parenting is easy. It's tough. It is really tough, and
Yeah.
particularly, and we've been asked to do a lot, especially this transgenerational stuff. For lots of us, we have been asked to make radical departures from what we inherited. And that is itself quite courageous thing to do. So I'm a fellow traveler, you know, and I think I want that to be very clear. I'm a fellow traveler. I'm not here pontificating from some high point. I'm
No.
saying, come on, guys, this is a journey, but it's a fight that we have to win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I
Go
can
ahead.
mention one thing, um, I think we would all agree that parenting is probably one of the most difficult, challenging things that we have ever done
Yeah.
in our lives. It is by far the hardest thing that I have done. And what I want to sort of leave our listeners with is that there is a way to apologize as well.
Yeah.
No one gets it right all of the time. I have moments that I am not proud of or pleased of. If we can look at ourselves on a panoramic screen or a board and just look at just how we handle certain situations, there's a lot to apologize for. And I think that infusing that in your parenting gives you and your child an opportunity to start over. It also models for your child how to say, I'm sorry, what I've done or what I did in that moment was wrong. And it shows that we don't have everything figured out as adults. There is much to say about the impact, the negative impacts of physical and corporal punishment and all of that. And I think we are all testament that if you've been a part of a familial dynamic where there has been corporal punishment,
Yeah.
all is not lost. Yes, there are pervasive, negative things that are associated with it, including equating sometimes love with violence
Yeah.
and impacting who you choose as an intimate partner.
Yeah.
If you think that, I can communicate in violence and that is love, right?
Yeah.
So it's also seeps into domestic violence, but there's also redemption in all
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
And there's always a way to go back and say, okay, how can we redo this? We can't undo yesterday, right?
Yeah.
It's already done. But how do we go in and say, okay, how do we figure out how we want to move from this moment moving forward, understanding that ultimately what I want from my child, I'm not demanding respect, which you said, respect and obedience, those things are going to be very subjective in terms
Yeah.
of what you classify as those
Yeah.
things. And so having that conversation and having that communication with your child, setting up the boundaries, having the consequences, letting them know and letting everyone know that in gentle parenting, we're not talking about children having free reign. That's absolutely not, what we're saying or suggesting, but just understanding that that there is a way to reformat, there is a way to challenge previous thought on how one thing should be done. We do it every single day, every time we make a different decision in terms of what we've had done in our formative years or from parenting. Every time we decide to do something differently, we're challenging that previous thought and we're making a decision that works for our household in this time period,
Yeah.
right? We're in a very, very different society. So I want to leave that with families that there's one parent, an adoptive parent, that speaks on our panels in my professional space quite frequently. Her name is Deb Shug. I think she's an angel. She adopted 8 children, all with significant special needs. And one of the things that she left is, if you're doing if you're practicing gentle parenting
Yeah.
and you are doing that intentional form of parenting, at least 60% of the time,
Mhm.
you're doing well,
Mm.
because it is exhausting.
It
It,
is.
it takes a lot of time, but yeah, and yes, you're going to have the sustainable results. But we're not suggesting that this is easy. It's going to be a lot of work to rewire and reformat and forecast something different. So it takes work. It's not something that you'll overcome in one day. It's going to be effort after effort after effort, and repeated incidents of, okay, I'm gonna try it again. That was not good. That was not, that. Let's try that again, right? So I want to leave people with that type of hope. Yes, there are negative outcomes, but you can go back and try to salvage and try to, you know, redeem and make sense of how we do this thing called parenting.
Good.
So, last question before we wrap it up. As parents on this journey, because each of you have made the decision to parent in a more gentle, conscious, mindful way, um, what do you believe is the first most effective step for change? And how do you maintain your practice and choice to parent this way? Because, like Sarah said, it is not easy. Obviously, the more you do it, it stacks on top of each other and you learn, etc. But it's not easy. How do you maintain it? And what's the first step? For a parent on here today who just smacked their child yesterday and feel within them that I'm doing something wrong, what's the first step that they should take to change? And how do they maintain that?
I think that the first step is to be gentle with yourself. So we're talking about gentle parenting, but us as parents, sometimes we have to parent ourselves, and we have to be gentle doing
Yeah.
so.
Mm.
um, I know there's a lot of people who have experienced trauma, and so the first thing is to address that, to get healing, to make peace, to deal
Yeah.
with the trauma so that it does not get in the way of your parenting. Because if you don't deal with your own trauma, then you're like we're talking about, is gonna go on to the next generation
Mhm.
and to the next generation. So we have to determine in our generation, in our parenting, that it stops here. It stops with me. I'm
Yeah.
gonna deal with the trauma that my parent inherited from her parent and from their parents. And it's
Mhm.
going to stop with me, because I'm going to deal with the trauma. I'm going to deal with the pain. I'm going to grieve. I'm going to cry and bawl. I'm going to feel the pain, and
Mhm.
let it go, so that I can present better for my child.
Yeah.
And so learning to regulate yourself, and that is working for me.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, like everybody said, it's not perfect, but for me, I find that learning to regulate myself,
Mhm.
checking in with myself emotionally during the day, when I'm interacting with my children. And then sometimes you have to, like my daughter, my first daughter, she's so perceptive. She'll say, Mom, what's going on with you? Are you sad? And learn to validate your own emotions. I'll say, yes, I'm feeling kind of sad today, so you know we can talk about it later, because she always wants to help.
Yeah.
And so for me, learning to be comfortable with sharing negative emotions, because we all are comfortable with sharing positive emotions. We're happy, we're excited, and everybody's okay with that. But when you're experiencing negative emotions, then we want to hide that from our children. And so when they're experiencing it, they don't want to show it to us, because for them that's abnormal. So we need to normalize feeling sadness, feeling stress, and let them see how we cope with it, so that they are able to learn to cope with it themselves when they're experiencing negative emotions.
Yeah.
And so I think that is very important, and I think that that helps a lot with parenting, and with breaking the cycle of negative parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, yes, Gail, I think that's a really, really good place to start, and I think, yeah, I was just reflecting, and I think that's where I start to, a certain level of self-compassion, a
Mm-hmm.
certain of recognizing that, hey, you know, I don't have all the tools here.
no.
I really don't know what I'm doing. As we say in Dominica, it's a thing I trying, you know. Uh, um, but I'm committed to be vulnerable. I think
Mm-hmm.
over the years I've really embraced my own vulnerability. And as
Yeah.
you said, I mean, I was listening again, just mimicking them. My son is particularly perceptive, you know, and in a very roundabout way. I think I sometimes, sometimes, well, who's the mental health professional and who's the child? Of course, within boundaries, it's
Yeah.
really asking. And it's like, how are you feeling? How are things in your world? Of course, these are things that I started off asking them when they were
Yeah, and they learn.
very young. And
Yeah.
then they're like, Dad, but how are things in your world? You seem a bit upset, it's sad. And it's
Mm-hmm.
about being able to say, well, yes, I'm sad,
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared, I'm a bit
Mm-hmm.
fearful, you
Mm-hmm.
know, just normalizing those emotions because there's nothing wrong with being sad,
It takes
Exactly.
nothing away from you
you
as a parent.
know, there's nothing wrong with being angry. These are normal, natural human emotions
Yeah.
that children will experience. They will be
Mm-hmm.
sad. So we have to develop this way of normalizing those emotions and providing the space where they can, express it. Now, it's not easy because I tell you what. So my son and I will have this, and my daughter, we'll have discussions, and sometimes they would say things to me, and I just look at them and think, and my default would be, oh, this response, and I think, no, that wouldn't be gentle parenting,
Yeah.
So it's this constant. I don't always get it right, you
Yeah.
know. Sometimes I have to say, you know what, mate, today I just want you to do what I'm saying. I'm not in for a discussion. But most days I could entertain because it's as one of the panelists said earlier, it's about really how are you getting the kids, to say I am, as you said, Gail. Okay, this is where we're trying to negotiate, Louise. This is where we're trying to negotiate, and you're teaching the children that you can negotiate most things. You
Yeah.
can have a view. You're not somebody who is this little person who needs done to. You could do with. So I
Yeah.
really think this is something that we need to think about doing with our children, but feeling with our children. I think there is this. I mean, there's this lovely book. I would recommend this book by Philippa Perry, the book you wished your parents had read. I think probably put
Yeah.
this in the chat. I think that for me that was a lifesaver in terms of just
Yeah.
really helping me to come to terms with my parenting. So I definitely recommend it because it's really about learning to feel with our children. Because what we do, we think with our children and we instruct them. We don't feel with them, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important we learn to do that. But in rounding up, though, I know we've been talking about transgenerational, parenting. And I think probably I'd want to end by saying, how do we, in my view, how do you end this? How do you break this cycle?
Yeah.
I think you do that by asking what I think are three questions, really. And I'll be brief. I think you ask first, what ideas have I learned from my parents?
Mm-hmm.
I think we all should ask ourselves, well, what ideas have I learned from my parents? Or more specifically, what ideas of the world have I learned from my parents? And then evaluate them in the second question, are they true?
Mm.
Mhm. That's good.
And then finally, I think we should ask, Well, this is what I learned from my parents. Are they true? Then the third question should be, but who am I? Who is Lario? I'm not my parents. Who am I? What are my unique experiences? How have they shaped me? Who am I as an individual,
Yeah.
separate from my family? How am I carving myself? And these are very big questions. And Gail, you alluded to it. And I think, if you may not have the resources to access a therapist or a counselor, but find help to help you really
Yeah.
move that, because these are, you know, we teach our children to moisturize. We teach them to brush their teeth. We teach them about their physical safety. Sadly, we neglect their emotional health. And
Mhm.
I see every day in my practice the impact, sadly, of the way that this is manifested in some really significant mental illness, and children who are just not living, to quote the millennials, not living their best life. And that is what we want. That is what we want as parents. Yes, we want them to achieve academically, but more than most, I think, we want them to be happy people, to find their space in the world, and to live their truth, whatever that may be.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I think they both hit it on the head. I really, really like the concept of being gracious with
Yeah.
yourself as, as a good place to start. And then also coupling how you view your child. I think if we change the image of, children being, just beings that we are in control over, and they're our property, then that really is going to influence how we engage and how we interact with them. But if
Yeah.
we see them as, vessels that we are stewards over, they are blessings to us that we have been entrusted with to mold and develop. And as they're working through, how to navigate and how to communicate and how to express, and we allow them the voice and the
Yeah.
space to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even simple things such as, finishing your food at the table or eating stuff that you don't like. We don't do that as adults. If we are finished with something, we are finished with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we'll have a child, sit at the table for hours on end, forcing them to eat something that they may not like as they're developing their palate. And I'm
Yeah.
talking about food here, but we can really translate this to many other things.
Your relationship with food.
Yeah, as they're developing their palate, as they're developing their likes and dislikes, as they're developing, this is their personalities coming into being.
Yeah.
How we view that and where we place that on the mantle, the priority that we give to that in helping them to shape and seeing ourselves as the educators and the teachers discipline comes from disciple, right?
Yeah.
And teaching, if we view it in that way, it's going to shift. It's going to be an entire paradigm shift in terms of how we engage them. And no one is saying that you are, going to be equals in the house. Of course, you're the one that still has authority,
Yeah.
but how you exact that is
Yeah.
going to be, very, very, very critical in terms of their development. So I think, being gracious with yourself, and then also changing the concept of how you view your child and your responsibility, the responsibility that's been given to you in terms of raising them, is going to create those initial steps in, okay, so this is my responsibility. How do I want to effectively engage? How do I want to effectively parent in this situation? And you do it from one scenario to the next. And I think you really do have to let go of the riffraff and the talk of the community and
Mm-hmm.
really just focus on you and your child. Because if you sit in your house, to use that food example again, if you sit in your house as your child is expressing something, a dislike, and you have the community in your ear, you're
Yeah.
going to feel obligated to say, no, you're going to
Yeah.
eat that. You're
Yeah.
going to do this because you feel like you have that obligation to show up as, I'm the boss, I'm in control, right? And so relinquishing that illusion of control, giving up the power struggle. I talk about this all the time with my parents at
Mhm.
work, relinquish the power struggle and
Mhm.
figure out what is the end result that you want from this particular interaction. And then you plot your steps to be able to get there. And
Absolutely.
it's going to look different for everyone,
Yeah.
right? But as long as you're not, utilizing tactics that are going to be, violent or harsh or maladaptive, figuring out, what is the impact, what's the long-term impact of this particular engagement, then you use all of that. It's a lot of self-talk in the moment. You can check yourself in the moment too. If you
Mhm.
hear your stuff, if it jump out, right?
Yeah.
You can dial it back. You can dial it back and say, okay, let me take a step back, one,
Mhm.
two, three, and then start over again. You can do that. You're
Yeah.
not on a stage. It's you and your child in your house, in your parents,
Absolutely.
or in the grocery store, or
Yeah.
wherever. We fear embarrassment.
Yeah.
Don't let a child act up in the grocery store. Now we're on display, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we feel that everyone is here to judge how we respond in this
Yeah.
situation. But just keeping it as you and your child. That's
Yeah.
it. You
Yeah.
and your child. That's your audience. That's who you're responsible for. That's your vessel. And you go from there day by day, step by step.
Thank you, guys. I want to stress the part about being gracious and self care. I think that works so well for me. I think when I am not okay and when I haven't taken good care of myself, it's when it's the hardest for me to parent gently. And it's the hardest to be mindful about anything, the hardest time to be conscious about anything, even in your adult relationships. So I
Yeah.
think self care is so important. Another thing I want to stress today is that we are not here to bash our parents.
At
Our
all.
parents did their best. Most of our parents, I'm not saying that they are parents who didn't, were just not abusive just for the sake of being abusive. But I think by far, most parents would have been doing their best, what they thought was the right thing to do. We're learning so much more today. We have so much more access to tools that are more readily available for us, things that we understand in a different way now that our parents didn't have back then in the 80s, in the 90s. And I think I am very grateful for my parents having done better than their parents, but still I need to recognize where they made mistakes.
Mhm.
And it helps me to recognize where I'm making mistakes now. And my son will have to do this. My sons will have to do this later on to recognize where I made mistakes and to correct that. Because the more we do better, the more we enable the next generation to do better. And I think this is what we need to understand. This is not blaming, this is not bashing, this is just about understanding and thinking. Um, now, like I said, if I get nothing across today, if we get nothing across today, I hope we get you, the audience, to think about why you parent the way you parent and to be more conscious about it. We have given you a lot to digest today. There is so much more we wanted to touch on, but we are running out. We've run out of time, actually. We're not running out anymore. We have run out. Um, but I don't want to leave you here. We don't want to leave you here. On January 3rd, we're going to begin a parenting shift challenge. Um, uh, and you can, to find out more about it, because I'm not going to talk too much about it now, you can follow us on on the Whole Parenting Facebook page or on Instagram. But it's going to be a challenge that's not going to cost you anything. I'm so very passionate about this whole subject and about helping people to understand that they can actually do this differently. I hate to see that people, or I hate to think that people think that the only way to parent effectively is to be harsh. And so in the challenge, we're going to talk about self care. We're going to practice all of these things and we're going to stack everything one day upon the other. So by the end of the 30th day, we hope that we will see marked change, and I believe that we will see marked change. And I'm doing this challenge along with everybody else who will join us. We're going to be dealing with parenting choices, about self-care, observing parenting triggers, which is something that's so important, focusing on regulating ourselves, practice of being more mindful, behavioral changes in our own self and to help facilitate behavioral change in our children, and a deeper connection with our children. And hopefully by the end of the 30 days, if you stack every one of these things one on top of the other, you would see how in 30 days a change can be in effect, come into effect. I really hope that you guys will join us for this, because I believe that it will be life changing, and I don't want to leave you here after we have this discussion and just drop you. I want us to be able to continue this. Also, I know people have been putting questions in the chat and we haven't been able to answer them. Um, all the panelists will have a look during the week, the coming week, at the questions in the chat, and we will answer those that need answering and we'll respond to your questions as well. Um, have a lovely Christmas break, a lovely festive season, everybody. And I hope I will see you on January 3rd when we will kick off our Parenting Shift Challenge. Have a lovely week and see you
Okay.
soon.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.